Hi everyone, this is Sean from Hancock Guitars. I'm going to bend a set of sides today using the Ibex Bending Iron. This is quite a long process, so I'll jump straight into it. The sides are silky oak. They've been thickness down to about 2.4 millimeters, which is about perfect for bending sides. The thickness of the sides is really critical. You don't want them to be too thick or they're going to be very difficult to bend. At the same time, you can't go too thin or they'll be too thin. So something between 2 millimeters and 2.5 millimeters is a good range for a typical guitar. You probably want to go a bit thinner for around a cutaway where it's got a really tight bend, or something like a ukulele that has some tight bends as well. For a start, you're going to want to know where to put the bends in the side. An easy way to do that is to use the template that you're using for the guitar and put a bit of masking tape around that one. You can then just mark the position of the waist on that tape and just approximately the center point of the upper bout bend. It doesn't have to be too accurate because there's no real clear center point of that one. Then you can pull that tape off, put it on your side, get it just roughly central so there's a bit of excess at the end, and then you can mark those points across the side so that you know where to bend. So I'll put a W on that one, and we know that's the waist. And I'm going to transfer those onto the other side. So it doesn't have to be very accurate. It's not going to bend very accurately anyway, as long as it's roughly in the right place and at the right end. And then I'm actually going to transfer them to the other side of the sides as well. You can do that just by flipping those two sides over. And finally, I'm just going to mark what's the outside. I'll just put OUT. Okay, that's really all of the marking that we need for now. And we can get straight into bending. We'll do the waist first because that's kind of the center point of the side, and then bend the two ends around after the waist is bent. We can do a bit on each side at a time. So bend the waist on one of them and then come back, bend the waist on the second side. And as that's setting, we can go back to the first one and do a bit more work on it. So on to the bending. I've had the bending iron plugged in for maybe 25 minutes, and that's a good amount of time. It's set to about 3/4. So if you have a look at the dial here, you can see it goes from off through low up to high. So I always put it on 3/4, which is actually about 6. You don't want to have it on high for too long or it can actually burn the element out. When it's on about 6, is at pretty much the right temperature, and you can just leave it there, bend your sides, no worries. There's a couple of ways you can test the bending iron, whether it's hot enough. Just a rule of thumb way is if you squirt some water on top, if it kind of jumps off it or evaporates very quickly, you know that it's hot enough. Or you can just use a thermometer. If you're going to do that, put something black on top of the bending iron, because the aluminium will actually throw off a infrared thermometer and show a wrong reading. If you can get an analog thermometer, that'll work just as well. Just pop that on top. So that's reading about 124, which is a good amount of heat. You really don't want it to drop below 100 or it won't do a good job bending. Sometimes if you're doing a lot of bending, the actual water in the timber will cool the iron down. It'll start to become ineffective. At that point you want to stop and let the iron heat up a bit more before you keep bending. So I'll start with this side, bending the waist. This is the outside marked out. So you'll want that side actually facing the iron because you want the waist to be bent inways. There's a couple of different ways to do it in regards to the water. My favorite way to get started is just get something like this chuck swipe. These actually work better than something like cotton. Just fold it over 2 or 3 times, get it nice and damp, and put that neatly against the surface. So you've got a bit of moisture there against the wood. Hold it at each end, put it on the iron where you want to bend it. So I've got that pencil mark lined up with the center of the round part of the iron here. What you want to do is just roll it back and forward. Get lots of that heat into it before you start pressing on it too much. So the heat has to get into the timber before it'll be able to bend. I'm putting a little bit of pressure on it, but not to actually bend it. It's just to kind of gauge when it starts to give. And you know when it starts to give that you can put a bit more pressure on and actually get the bend in there. So that's starting to feel like it's gonna give. If you find that chuck swipe is getting dry at any point in time, it's a good idea to move that along and get a bit more moisture into the timber. You can hear by that steam though, we're still going okay with regards to the water. You can also sometimes just feel, I'm feeling behind the timber there, and if you're getting a fair bit of heat coming through, you know that it's getting hot, definitely hot on the other side that's against the iron. What I'm going to do, you can see that's dried out. I'll drag that across a little bit, keep going. So doing that quickly doesn't allow the wood to cool down enough to have to go through the whole thing again, but you're going to get more moisture into it by moving that rag along. So the danger here obviously is that you put too much pressure on the wood and it cracks, or maybe it dries out too much. You don't get enough moisture or heat into there and it cracks. So it's a bit of an art and something that you just need to get the feel for. If you can start on some scrap timber, that's great, like before you bend a nice set of sides, because you'll get the feel for it. It's one of those things where it's not scientific in terms of saying that you need to have it on X amount of time. I'm just putting it on the side of that iron there to get a bit more heat into it. X amount of time. Some timbers will bend a lot quicker than others. The silky oak is quite a difficult one to bend, especially because it has a lot of those rays going across it, and they tend to want to crack by themselves. So we've got to take our time with this one and do it a little slowly. But you'll feel when it starts to want to give, and you can sort of put a bit more pressure on it then. If you do get any little cracks coming out of it, best to stop. Glue them with some super glue and then come back to it, because if you leave them, they will tend to just get bigger and bigger and you could wreck the side. If you glue them well with super glue and a clamp, often you can just keep bending and it'll continue. You can also press a little piece of wood behind the crack just to keep it supported while you bend the rest of the timber. I'm just going to have a break off that now. I'm going to hold the side. You can see it's starting to get there, but I want to let that bending iron heat up a bit. I think it's cooling down a bit from the water on it, and I'll keep going. That's had a few minutes to heat up again, and I've also dampened down the rag a little bit. I've been keeping pressure on the side so it doesn't spring back and we lose some of our progress, and I'm going to keep going. So it's hard to know how far to do the bend. In the waist here, it's a very short bend. It's really almost like the actual size of the bending iron. But when you get into the other bends, they're very long and sort of a compound shape. They're not a circle. You kind of just have to compare it to the template, decide from there how far you want to bend it. This one's just, the amount of rocking that I'm doing there is about right for an OM-shaped guitar. You can see that's starting to give now, getting the right amount of heat and moisture into it. As a rule of thumb, I find with these OM shapes, when the two ends of the side are kind of at 90 degrees to each other, so it forms like a right angle, that's approximately the right amount of bend in the waist, give or take, and then you can adjust it a little bit from there. You can hear like a few little cracks there too. I think what they are is the rays in the silky oak sort of popping out and cracking. It's actually a little bit scary when you hear that, because you think it's going to crack, which actually can happen. We'll assume that they are nothing to worry about at this stage and just keep going nice and slowly. So whatever area of the bending iron you roll the side around, that's going to be the length of the bend. So if you want a longer bend, you have to roll the side around a longer area of the bending iron. If you wanted a really tight little bend right in the waist, you would just keep the side relatively stationary and push on it, and that would give you just that tight sort of circumference in the middle of the side for the waist. So wherever the heat goes, basically the wood bends. You can see that's starting to get close to what I was saying about being about 90 degrees. Just going to go one more time moving that rag. Probably better to overbend it a little bit than underbend it. It's not quite 90, but I'm going to have a look at how that looks on the jig now. I use the jig because I've got these dowels to push on. It just makes it a little bit easier to check it. You could just use the thin template as well. So you can see that's getting close to this pencil mark, which is the outside of the guitar. It's just got a little bit more to go. So I'll keep going. You can also see the side starting to get these crease lines in it, which is fine. They'll sand out in the end. It's just the nature of this silky oak that it doesn't bend in an even arc. You get some of those crease lines, but as long as they're not too severe, you won't even notice them in the end. I'm thinking I could have gone a little thinner on this side too. Even a couple of tenths of a millimetre will make a massive difference to how easy it is to bend. This one's around, I think, about 2.5 millimetres. We could have gone down to something like 2.2. That would have made it a bit easier because it's a difficult timber. But it's kind of nice having thicker sides because they're going to make a bit stronger guitar in the end. A bit of a balance between the two. You don't want it too thin or too thick. Check that again. It's nearly there. Definitely want to just go a bit tighter in that waist. I'm going to give the iron a few minutes to heat up again and just do that last little bit of bending when it gets really hot. So I'll continue. I want to get that last little sharp bit of the bend in it. So you really want to get some nice heat going in right on the apex of that bend and just steady pressure. Side and just let it rest against the shape of the iron and let that iron really do its work on it. You can see we're getting a few little crackouts at the back there. That's on the inside, so it's not a huge deal, but they can be filled with a bit of super glue in the end, potentially clamped up. You're probably hearing some rain in the background as well. It just started pouring rain here, hitting the roof. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with that. You can see it's not quite matching the pencil line, but it is meeting the shape of the guitar in general. You can leave it at that. I'm just going to put some dowels at the back here to hold it. While that's setting, we can be bending the other side in that section. So I've bent that other waist to match. Both sides are in the same shape now. So I'll continue on with the first side that I bent the waist in and do the upper bout here and the lower bout here. So before I take it out, I'm going to actually just mark where that bend starts. You can tell that from where the side starts to diverge from the pencil line, which is the outline of the guitar. So in this case, that's around about there. Put a mark to let yourself know to bend it from that point around. You don't want to come back any further than that because you'll just misshape the side. Same thing here. It's very easy to bend the side to shape just without the bending iron to about there. So we'll want to go from about there back that way. I can pop that out. I'm going to just also put a little bit of super glue. You can see there's a little bit of crack across the side there. This silky oak's quite cracky kind of wood. You get these kind of cracks very often, especially with wood that has rays that travel across it, such as flame maple. Better off gluing them and potentially filling them with the glue. Give it a bit of sand later on. That can just be sort of drying while we're working on it. If the crack's too bad, you might want to use 2 blocks of wood and clamp the crack shut. These are very small cracks, so we can just fill those. So back over to the bending iron. We'll start using a different part of the iron for doing these parts of the side, the bends, because this part's too curved now, the part that we used for the waist. You can actually compare it to the template. So we're going to be bending this and this bend. So they are more like the sides of the bending iron, you can see there. So you kind of use that flatter curve of the side to do your best with getting those bends right. This one here may be a little bit tighter in places, in which case we can use down here. So we'll just play it by ear with that. The other thing I've done is gotten a new chuck swipe. They do get a bit dry and crusty when you use them for a while on the iron, sort of dried out and almost like burnt. So you're better off replacing them every now and then. I was finding when I was doing the other side that sometimes having 3 layers was good as well. It just got a bit more water into the timber and produced a bit more steam, helped conduct the heat across. I'll go with 2 for now. So same as before, but we're just using the side of the iron this time. I'd start from that point that we marked where it needs to start. We're basically just doing the same thing, but using the flat part of the iron. The silky oak is very hard wood to bend relatively. I could have picked something a bit easier for the demonstration, but if you know you can bend this, you can pretty much bend anything, I think. So I'm just going to work my way around till I get to the end of that side on the flat part of the iron, and then I can kind of modify that bend to be the perfect shape of the guitar. So now that's got the first little bit done, I'll take that off. Take those dowels out and just check how it's comparing to the line there. So it's starting to line up here, but it definitely needs a lot more here to match that curve of the guitar there. So just keep working on it. I can even use the other side of the iron, which will naturally be a bit hotter. It's getting there, so it's pretty good up to about that point. So let's continue with that. So I'll just continue to bend that around till I finish this side, and I'll do the same thing on the other side and then work on the 2 lower bits. You're basically just doing an inch at a time. You don't want to overbend it, you don't want to underbend it, you just want that curve in the side to match the line of the side perfectly. So just take your time with that. I'm almost at the end of the second side. I've done the upper bouts of both sides and the lower bout of the first side. I just wanted to say a couple of things that I didn't cover before regarding the bending. One of them is that you can actually use the bending iron without any rag between the side and the iron. You can actually put the side straight on the iron. And that can be really useful when you want to touch up a bend. You want that real tight control over what you're doing, especially if it's almost there, because you can see what you're doing more and you can get real precise pressure on a particular point. What you can do even is just give the side a little squirt potentially and just work directly on the iron. So that's good if you've got the bend almost right and you just want to touch it up a little bit and get it perfect. Once you get it to this point, it's kind of just fine tuning, just getting those curves really perfect to match the template. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the ends, and that is that you don't want to bend the very end of the side too much. So in other words, you don't want the two sides or one or both of them to hook in at the end. You kind of want them to out a little bit. Preferably have a small straight section of equal length of each side so that when they come together and the block's glued in here, you have a nice even round shape at the end. So don't go too crazy at the end and bend the side around. Leave a set distance at the end. That can kind of be calculated by, if you look at the end of the template, that the side can be bent around without actual bending on the machine, just through the natural sort of bending of forcing it around the template. So it's usually about maybe 100 millimeters from the center line. So I'm going to continue to bend this second side and get it to the same shape as the first one. We're done, a bent set of sides. So just leave the sides in the jig after you've bent it for around about a day. As they cool down and dry out, they'll set in shape. If you're not totally happy with the shape, or if you have any little kinks in them, you can bend those out or into them. You can adjust the shape on the second day on the bending iron. There's nothing stopping you doing that. Side bending is such a big part of building guitars. It's good to get a grip on it. If you've enjoyed this video, please help us out by hitting the like button or subscribing to our channel.